The Geometry of Driftwood. Chapter 1. The Quiet Conversations. The air in Julian's workshop always smelled of dried maple, hide glue, and time itself. It was a scent that had become my favorite perfume, a sensory trigger that lowered my blood pressure the moment I stepped across the threshold. I stood in the doorway, watching him before he knew I was there. He was bent over the open casing of a 1920s Steinway, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The afternoon light, filtered through the high, dusty windows of the loft, caught the silver that threaded through his dark hair at the temples. It wasn't gray. It was sterling, distinct and deliberate, like the inlay on the instrument he was restoring. "The numbers you see don't match the feeling," I whispered to myself, a mantra I had developed over the last 8 months. To the Census Bureau, to the DMV, and to my mother, the numbers were a cold, hard equation. 44 and 28. A gap of 16 years. A generation, as my friend Sarah liked to point out after 3 margaritas. To the outside world, that math was the defining feature of our relationship. It was the headline. But watching him work, the numbers dissolved. He turned a tuning hammer with a microscopic movement of his wrist, then struck a key. A single, resonant note A rang out, hanging in the silence. He tilted his head, listening not just to the sound, but to the decay of the sound. There was a patience in that posture that men my age simply didn't possess. The boys I had dated in college and the young professionals my parents tried to set me up with moved through life with a frantic, hungry energy. They were always checking their watches, always looking over my shoulder for the next opportunity, vibrating with the anxiety of establishing themselves. Julian was already established, not just in his career, but in his soul. He sensed me. He didn't jump or startle, he just turned, that slow, deliberate pivot that I loved. When his eyes met mine, the crinkles at the corners deepened. "You're early," he said. His voice was a baritone rumble, textured like the wood he worked with. "Meeting got out early," I lied. I had left the meeting. I had felt the walls of the marketing firm closing in on me, the frantic chatter about quarterly targets and social media engagement driving me to the edge of a panic attack. I needed to be here, where time moved differently. I walked over to him and he set the tool down. He didn't rush to grab me. He waited until I was close enough, then took my hand. His hands were large, calloused from the strings, but incredibly gentle. "Rough day?" he asked, rubbing his thumb over my knuckles. "Loud day," I corrected. "Everyone is just so loud." "Come here." He pulled me into the curve of the piano, effectively shielding me from the rest of the room. We stood there for a long time, having one of our quiet conversations. We didn't speak. He just held my hand, grounding me, letting his calmness osmose into my frantic nervous system. This was the wisdom in your eyes, a patience in your touch that the song of my life was currently playing. It wasn't that he gave me advice, it was that his presence suggested that urgency was a choice, and one I didn't have to make. "I have to go to my parents for dinner on Friday," I murmured into his chest. I felt him tense, just slightly. A microscopic shift, like a piano string tightening by a fraction of a millimeter. "Do you want me to come?" he asked. I hesitated. "I think it's time. I can't keep you a secret, Julian. It feels disrespectful to what this is, but they're..." "Stubborn?" he suggested with a small smile. "That's a polite word for it." He kissed the top of my head. "If you're ready, I'm ready. But Maya, you know what the whispers will be." "I know," I said, pulling back to look at him. "They'll say you're too much, or too old, or that I'm having a daddy crisis." And I don't care," I said, though my stomach did a traitorous little flip. "I'm caught between this," I squeezed his steady hand, "and them. But I'm choosing this." He looked at me with an expression that broke my heart a little. It was a look of profound gratitude mixed with a protective sadness. He knew, better than I did, what it cost to swim upstream. Chapter 2. The Sinking Ship. The prelude to the family dinner was drinks with the girls on Wednesday. It was supposed to be a strategy session, a pep talk. Instead, it felt like a deposition. We were at the Aviary, a trendy spot downtown where the music was too loud and the cocktails cost $20. Sarah and Chloe were my oldest friends. We had survived dorm rooms, bad breakups, and entry-level jobs together. I loved them ferociously. But lately, every gathering felt like a sinking ship, taking on water the moment Julian's name came up. "So, the Silver Fox is finally meeting the parents," Chloe said, shouting slightly over the thumping bass of a remix track. She swirled her martini. "Is he bringing his walker, or is he good with stairs?" "Haha," I said, taking a sip of my wine. "He runs 5 miles every morning, Chloe. He's in better shape than we are." I know, I'm just teasing, Chloe said, though her eyes were scanning the room, assessing the crowd. But seriously, Maya, are you ready for your mom? She's going to have a stroke. She's not going to have a stroke. She's going to be polite. Sarah bit her lip, a habit my mother also had. It's just, okay, look, we love you. You know that. But the difference isn't huge, right? It's not like he's 80, but it's not small. It's not a generation wide, technically, but culturally, it kind of is. He understands me better than anyone I've ever met, I said defensively. Does he get your TikTok references? Sarah asked. Does he know who Doja Cat is? Does he want to go to Coachella? I don't even want to go to Coachella, I snapped. And why does that matter? Why is a relationship defined by pop culture overlaps? It's not just pop culture, Sarah pressed, leaning in. Her expression shifted from mocking to genuinely worried. It's life stages, May. We're just starting. We're figuring out our careers, maybe thinking about kids in 5 years. He's done all that. He's settled. To your parents, and honestly, a little bit to us, it feels like a failure. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. A failure, I repeated. That you couldn't find a person from our class, Chloe said softly, backing Sarah up. Someone parallel, a name they recognize, like Brad from accounting or that guy Mike you went to college with, someone who is on the same timeline. When people look at you and Julian, they analyze the future. And the math looks scary, Maya. When you're 40, he'll be almost 60. When you're 50, I can do math, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking. I know how numbers work. But you guys are counting the years. You aren't counting the laughter. You aren't seeing how he supports me. You're ignoring the love because the arithmetic makes you uncomfortable. We're just worried, Sarah said, reaching for my hand. We don't want you to wake up in 10 years and realize you missed your own youth because you were living in his middle age. I pulled my hand away. My youth isn't a commodity I'm spending on him. It's my life. And I'm happier in his quiet living room than I have ever been in a loud bar with someone from my class. I walked out of the aviary feeling hollow. The whispers in the room weren't whispers anymore. They were direct indictments. Chapter 3. The Canyon. Friday arrived with the inevitability of a glacier. I drove us to my parents' house in the suburbs. Julian drove his vintage Volvo, of course, and the cabin was quiet and warm. He had brought a bottle of wine, a 2010 Bordeaux, impeccable choice, and flowers for my mother. He looked handsome in a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, casual but expensive. He looked like an adult, which made me feel, acutely, like a child. Relax, he said, reaching over to rest his hand on my knee as we turned onto Elm Street. I'm not going to bite them. They might bite you, I muttered. My mother was waiting at the door before we even knocked. The porch light illuminated her anxious smile. You made it, she chirped, her eyes immediately darting to Julian. She did a quick up and down scan, her internal calculator whirring. And this must be Julian. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Albright, Julian said, extending his hand. She took it, limp-wristed. Oh, please, call me Joyce. Come in, come in. My father was in the living room, nursing a scotch. Dad was a man of few words, mostly because he preferred to let his disapproval radiate in silence. He stood up, looking Julian in the eye. My father was 60. Julian was 44. They were closer in age than Julian and I were. The realization seemed to hit my father like a physical blow. Sir, Julian nodded. Drink? My dad asked, gesturing to the bar cart. I'm driving, but thank you, Julian said. Responsible, Dad grunted. Good. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the kind we usually saved for Thanksgiving. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Dinner started well enough. Julian was charming. He knew how to talk to anyone. He asked my mother about her garden, correctly identifying the species of hydrangeas she was struggling with. He asked my father about the market, offering intelligent but not overbearing commentary on interest rates. But the small space on the calendar page, the 16 years, sat in the center of the table like a rotting centerpiece. It started with the remember when stories. Maya, do you remember your sweet 16? My mother asked, laughing nervously. It feels like just yesterday. We rented that hall. It was 12 years ago, Mom, I said, cutting my steak. Right, she said, then turned to Julian. What were you doing 12 years ago, Julian? Just for context. It was a trap. Julian paused, his fork hovering. 12 years ago, I was opening my second workshop, and I believe I was finishing a restoration on a harpsichord for the Smithsonian. Ah, my mother said, her smile tight. So while Maya was worrying about her driver's license, you were working for the Smithsonian. That's quite a gap. It is, Julian agreed calmly, but we find we meet in the middle quite well. The middle moves, though, doesn't it? My mother put her fork down. She bit her lip. There it was, the tell. They say the seasons shift too soon. I worry, Julian. I worry that right now she's young and beautiful and interesting to you, but we'll be left behind. She'll want things, energy, that you might not have in a decade. Mom, stop, I said, my voice rising. No, Maya, we need to be realistic, she insisted, her voice trembling. What comes after? That's what I'm asking. Everyone ignores the lovey-dovey part and demands to know what comes after. When she's 40 and you're nearing retirement. When she wants to go hiking and you have a bad hip. Have you thought about that? Or are you just enjoying the ego boost of a younger girlfriend? The silence that followed was deafening. It felt like a canyon had opened up in the dining room floor. On one side, my parents, terrified and clinging to social norms. On the other side, Julian and I. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. Ego boost? Is that what you think this is? Maya, sit down, my father barked. No, I said, trembling. You count the years. That's all you do. You look at a calendar and you decide what's possible. You don't count the laughter. You don't see that he listens to me. You don't see that when I'm with him, I don't feel like I'm drowning in expectations. You're asking what comes after because you're too scared to look at what is happening now. Julian stood up slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked sad, but resolved. He placed a hand on my shoulder, not to silence me, but to steady me. Joyce, Robert, he said, his voice low and even. I cannot promise you that my knees won't hurt in 20 years. I cannot promise that I will live forever. But I can promise you that I love your daughter with a reverence and a consistency that I did not possess when I was 25. I have lived enough life to know when I have found something rare. I don't take her time for granted specifically because I know how fast it goes. My mother looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. It's not what we pictured. I know, Julian said gently. It's a different kind of picture. We left before dessert. Chapter 4. The shared load. The car ride home was silent for the first 10 minutes. The suburbs unspooled into the highway, the streetlights rhythmically passing over the dashboard like a metronome. We pulled over at a scenic overlook near the city limits. It wasn't a romantic spot, really, just a gravel patch overlooking the grid of city lights. Julian cut the engine. The silence of the car felt heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of the dinner table. I'm sorry, I said, putting my face in my hands. That was humiliating. It was honest, Julian said. He unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face me. Maya, look at me. I turned. In the dashboard glow, he looked tired. The age showed around his eyes tonight. You told me once, I whispered, remembering a conversation from our first month together, that they see the distance, not the road. I did, he nodded. It feels like a really long road tonight, Julian. My mother, what she said about the ego boost. Does a part of you— No, he cut me off firmly. Never. You are not a trophy, Maya. You are my partner. He sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. But I realize this struggle is a heavy, shared load. I can't ask you to ignore your family forever. I can't ask you to lose your friends. I'm not losing them, I said, though I wasn't sure. They're just adjusting. We walk this line together, he said, taking my hand. Through the doubt, through the stare. But you have to be sure, Maya, because the stares don't go away. The waiter will always ask if I'm your father. The insurance forms will always look weird. The math will never change. The 16 years will always be there. I don't want the math to change, I said, realizing it was true. I like the math. I like who you are because of those 16 years. I like that you don't play games. I like that you know who you are. If you were 28, you wouldn't be you. And if you were 44, he smiled, you wouldn't be the spark that lit my life back up. What we've built between us, I said, tracing the lines on his palm, is something honest, something rare. Why would I trade rare for normal? He leaned across the console and kissed me. It wasn't a desperate kiss, it was a claiming. It was a reaffirmation of the treaty we had signed with each other against the world. Chapter 5. The Tide. 6 months later, we hosted a small gathering at Julian's loft. It wasn't a dinner party. It was just an evening. Music, wine, open windows letting in the spring air. My mother came. She was stiff at first, holding her purse like a shield. Sarah and Chloe came too, looking skeptical. Julian was at the piano. He wasn't performing, exactly. He was just playing background music. A soft, improvisational jazz piece that meandered like a river. I watched my mother watching him. She wasn't looking at his hairline anymore. She was watching his hands. She was watching the way he looked at me across the room, a quick, private smile in the middle of a chord change. I walked over to the piano and sat on the bench next to him. He didn't stop playing. He just shifted to make room, his left hand continuing the bass line, while his right hand reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey," I whispered back. I looked out at the room. My friends were laughing near the balcony. My mother was actually talking to my father, pointing at a piece of restored woodwork, looking impressed. The whispers were still there, I'm sure. Somewhere, someone was doing the math. Someone was thinking, he's too old for her. Someone was wondering, what comes after? But the volume had been turned down. I realized then that the seasons would shift. They were right about that. We would get older. He would get older faster than I would. There would be hard days. There would be a time when the gap felt like a canyon again. But that was future time. That was calendar time. Here, on the piano bench, my heart kept time with his heart. It was a syncopated rhythm, a polyrhythm of a different kind. It didn't follow the standard 4/4 beat of the suburban life I had been raised for. It was complex and jazz-like and entirely ours. I rested my head on his shoulder as he played the final chords of the song. Let the tide roll in, I thought, closing my eyes. Let the family make up their mind. We had our own clock now. The metronome on the shelf ticked steadily, back and forth, but we weren't watching it. "Ready for the next movement?" Julian asked softly, his fingers lingering on the keys. "Play it," I said. "I'm listening." And in the small space of that room, just him and I, the canyon closed, and there was only the music.